My parents didn't show up to my graduation. Not a seat saved, not a face in the crowd, just their silence ringing louder than the stadium speakers. I walked the stage, a lone diploma in hand, pretending it didn't sting. The next morning, while my cap and gown still lay on the floor, my aunt called. "Your parents are going door to door, borrowing money in your name." I froze. Then I drove straight to their house, and what I saw in that living room made me realize the graduation wasn't the betrayal. It was only the invitation to something far worse. I grew up learning that silence was easier to carry than hope. It started small in ways no one outside a family would notice. At my elementary school recital, I remember standing behind the curtain rubbing the edge of my costume with sweaty hands. Parents filled the auditorium calling out names, waving phones. My mother's seat stayed empty. She arrived halfway through the show, sunglasses still on, whispering that traffic was unbelievable. She never asked what song I sang. I stopped mentioning recitals after that. By middle school, the pattern had settled into my bones. I joined the debate club and made it to the finals. I told my parents the date, twice wrote it on the fridge, even placed the reminder under my mother's coffee mug. She moved it aside without looking. When I won second place, I brought home the certificate. She glanced at it and said, "Nice, but don't let it distract you from real goals." She didn't ask what the topic had been. She didn't ask who I debated. My father just nodded the same nod he used when agreeing to anything that avoided conflict. High school didn't soften anything. My brother Luke blossomed into the Golden Child Varsity Sports Weekend hangouts, endless praise. My mother called him our miracle. When he forgot homework, she drove across town to deliver it. When I stayed late at the library working on a project that counted for half my grade, she texted, "Don't be dramatic. You have keys." Luke brought home average grades and got celebratory pizza. I made honor roll and got silence. Money was the clearest divide. During freshman year of college, I worked 2 jobs, early morning shelving shifts at a bookstore and weekend data entry for a local office. I kept every receipt, every payment stub, every small proof that I wasn't a burden. My parents, meanwhile, told relatives they were supporting me through school that education isn't cheap, but we do what we must for our kids. I heard it at Thanksgiving one year, sitting at the end of the table with my plate half full. My mother spoke loudly enough for the room, smiling as if she were the reason I stayed afloat. What hurt wasn't the lie itself, it was how comfortably she told it. Even birthdays were quiet reminders. On my 18th, I made myself a cake from a boxed mix because my parents were at one of Luke's tournaments. They came home late, tired, and my mother said, "Oh, right today," before going upstairs. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, then lowered it again, unsure what to say. I blew out the candles alone. There were other moments, small, forgettable to them, unforgettable to me. A college acceptance letter placed under a stack of magazines as if it belonged with junk mail. A scholarship notice that my mother used as a coaster. A night I ran a fever but still went to my shift because missing one meant missing rent. I didn't tell them. They didn't ask. Somewhere in those years, I learned a quiet truth: being overlooked hurts less when you stop expecting to be seen. I didn't realize how much that lesson had shaped me until graduation day. Standing beneath those stadium lights, scanning a crowd that wasn't searching for me, everything I'd lived through folded neatly into one sharp understanding. This wasn't new. It was just the same pattern, finally too loud to ignore. The morning after graduation felt unnaturally still, as if the city hadn't decided to wake up yet. My cap and gown were still on the floor, where I'd dropped them, creased fabric, a tassel curled like a question mark. I stepped over them on my way to make coffee, pretending the sight didn't bother me. The phone rang before the kettle finished boiling. Aunt Helen never called this early. She never called without texting first. I answered anyway. Jade. Her voice sounded like someone holding something uncomfortable in their hands. "Are you awake? I'm here," I said. There was a pause, too long to be casual, too short to be comforting. Then she exhaled. "Your parents are going door to door, borrowing money in your name." I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. The kettle clicked off behind me, the sound strangely sharp in the quiet apartment. "They told everyone you have a high-paying job lined up," she continued. "They're saying you offered to vouch for the loans. Some people already gave them cash." I pressed my thumb to the edge of the counter, grounding myself on something solid. The image of my empty graduation row resurfaced with a different kind of weight. Another buzz interrupted us. A message from a cousin I barely spoke to. Hey, is it true we're supposed to send money to your parents? They said you'll pay us back once you start that job. That job, the one I hadn't even interviewed for yet. Aunt Helen kept talking, explaining which houses my parents had already visited, which neighbors were confused, who believed them and who didn't. Her words blurred into a single slow realization. It wasn't that they forgot me yesterday. It was that they remembered me today only as leverage. I picked up the gown from the floor, the fabric limp in my hands. It still smelled faintly of sun and dust from the stadium. The silence on the line grew heavier. Jade, she finally whispered, you didn't know, did you? No, I said. My voice didn't shake. I didn't. Another message came through. A neighbor. Can you confirm this? They said you asked them for help. I let the phone screen dim. I'll handle it, I told her. And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I meant it. I didn't move for a long time after the call ended. The apartment held its breath with me. Morning light filtered through the blinds in thin, pale stripes casting shadows across the cap and gown, still in my hands. I folded them slowly, smoothing the creases with my palm, and set them on the chair by the window. The quiet felt deliberate, like it wanted me to hear something I had ignored for years. I opened my laptop. My inbox was filled with automated replies from job applications. Nothing definite, nothing promised. Just a row of maybes lined up like dominoes waiting for a push. If the wrong rumor spread about me owing money, or worse, about being financially reckless, every one of these maybes could vanish. Reputation mattered, especially when you were starting at the bottom. I clicked through bank statements next, every tuition payment I'd made, every paycheck from the bookstore, every early morning shift, every late-night data entry job. I scrolled through it all until the numbers blurred. There was no sign of my parents' involvement anywhere because they hadn't been there. Not when it counted. A knot formed at the base of my throat, not grief, not anger, just the cold shape of clarity. My phone buzzed again. More messages asking me to confirm what my parents were claiming. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet and began typing. Dates, names, amounts mentioned, screenshots pasted into neat columns. Everything lined up in rows, so clean and clear they couldn't be twisted later. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it, but I knew I needed it. Aunt Helen sent a voice message next. I didn't play it. I saved it directly into a folder labeled simply for later. The kettle on the counter clicked as it cooled. The apartment still smelled faintly of stale steam and the detergent from my graduation gown. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the air settle. Then I stood up. I moved through my apartment the way someone prepares a room before leaving for a long trip without hurry, but with purpose. I gathered documents from a shoebox under the bed, old pay stubs, scholarship letters, receipts from classes I'd covered myself. I hadn't known why I kept them all these years. Now I did. I placed everything on the kitchen table. The edges of the papers curled slightly from heat or age. I straightened them one by one, my fingers steady. There was a calmness inside me I didn't recognize. Not peace, something colder, something sharper. When the folder was full, I zipped it shut and held it in my hands for a few seconds. It felt heavier than it looked. A text came in from Luke. Mom said you're being dramatic. Just clear it up. Clear it up. The phrase sat on my tongue like metal. I didn't reply. Instead, I grabbed my keys. The metal was cool against my palm, the familiar weight grounding. For years, I had believed action meant confrontation. Now I understood action could also mean clarity, moving toward the truth without announcing it. Outside, the air carried the faint scent of rain on pavement. I slid into my car, closed the door quietly, and sat without starting the engine. The driveway behind my building was empty except for a lone recycling bin tipped slightly to the side. A wind stirred it, making it wobble. I stared ahead at nothing in particular. The silence inside the car felt different from the silence in the apartment. This one wasn't waiting. It was ready. I turned the key. The engine started with a low hum. I pulled out onto the street, the tires rolling over small stones with soft crunches. The city looked unchanged. People walking, dogs, joggers crossing intersections, cars lined up at stoplights. Ordinary. Unaware. But something in the air felt thinner, as if a thread had been pulled loose and was waiting to unravel fully. My parents lived 15 minutes away. I knew the turns by heart. I had taken them thousands of times as a kid, counting mailboxes, watching the seasons change on the same rows of trees. Today, the drive felt unfamiliar, like I was revisiting a place in a dream rather than real life. Halfway there, I stopped at a red light. A family in the next lane laughed inside their SUV, a toddler beating the back of the seat with tiny fists while the mother tried to hand him a snack. The father glanced at her, smiling. It was such a simple thing being present. I watched them until the light turned green. The closer I got to my parents' street, the more a certain heaviness tightened across my ribs. But it wasn't fear. It was something closer to inevitability. Their house looked the same as always from the outside. Porch light still broken. The planter my mother bought on sale still chipped at the corner. A faded wreath hung on the door out of season. Ordinary details masking everything underneath. I parked on the curb. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. I stayed still, hands on the steering wheel, eyes on the front door. I wasn't thinking about what I would say. I wasn't planning an argument. I wasn't trying to prepare for excuses I already knew would come. I was listening to myself, to the quiet inside my chest that had grown too full to ignore. I unbuckled my seatbelt, picked up the folder, opened the car door. The air outside was cooler than before, brushing against my cheeks as if to remind me I was here awake, making a choice I couldn't step back from. I walked up the path slowly, each step deliberate. Cracks in the pavement, stray leaves, the sound of my own breathing, everything felt unnervingly clear. Before I knocked, I stood still for one final breath, letting the silence settle between my shoulders. Then I lifted my hand. The moment before my knuckles touched the door, I understood something with perfect certainty. Whatever was waiting on the other side wasn't going to ruin me. It was only going to reveal what had already been broken. My mother opened the door before I could knock twice. Her expression flickered, surprise, annoyance, calculation, then settled into a tight smile. "Oh, you're here," she said, stepping aside as if doing me a favor. The living room was fuller than I expected. A couple from our extended family sat on the couch, an envelope resting between them. My father hovered nearby, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and something sour beneath it, tension maybe. No one spoke at first. Then the woman on the couch said, "Jade, honey, we didn't expect to see you today." Her fingers tightened around the envelope as if she hoped I wouldn't ask what was inside. My mother moved to block my view, voice clipped. "We're in the middle of something important. If you had called, I didn't answer." I stepped past her. On the coffee table sat more envelopes, some thin, some thick, some already opened. My father cleared his throat, the sound brittle. "Your mother, we—" But Linda interrupted him, her tone shifting to something rehearsed. "We just needed a little help. Families do that. You're making this bigger than it is." I placed the folder in my hand onto the table. The soft thud made every head turn. My mother's jaw tightened. "What is that?" "Everything you said I offered to cover," I replied. Her face went pale for a second before settling into indignation. "Jade, don't start. They believed us because they trust us. That's how family works." The older man on the couch looked between us, confused. "So, you didn't promise to pay us back." I opened the folder quietly. Pages slid forward, screenshots, bank statements, scholarship letters, work stubs. Proof of what I had done alone. Proof of what they hadn't. My father took a small step back. My mother's voice cracked with false outrage. "You're twisting things. We told people you'd help because you owe this family. All that education. You think you got there alone." A hush fell over the room. Aunt Helen stepped through the doorway behind me. She must have followed when she saw my car outside. She folded her arms, gaze steady. "You didn't pay a cent of her schooling," she said quietly. "You told everyone you did, but we all know who covered what." The couple on the couch stiffened. The woman whispered, "We gave them money because we thought Jade guaranteed it." "I didn't," I said. "I never agreed to anything." My mother's composure cracked. "You're being dramatic. It's not a crime to ask for help." "You didn't ask," I replied. "You used my name." More relatives appeared in the hallway, drawn by the rising voices. My father finally spoke barely above a whisper. "Linda, maybe we should just don't you dare fold now," she snapped. But it was too late. The room had shifted. Faces that once nodded along to her stories were now watching her with something new doubt. I gathered the papers and held them in my hands. Each sheet felt like a boundary forming. Then I looked directly at her. "If you needed help, you could have asked," I said. "But you didn't ask, you used me." Silence hit the room like a dropped glass. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father lowered his eyes. The couple placed their envelope back on the table as though it burned. For years, I had been the quiet one. Now, the quiet didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I didn't remember leaving the house. One moment I was standing in their living room, the air thick with silence that no one dared to break. The next, I was outside on the porch, the door closing behind me with a muted latch. Evening had crept in without my noticing. The sky over the neighborhood was a muted blue, the kind that appears right before the streetlights hum on. I walked down the steps, slowly. The air smelled of cut grass and something faintly metallic spring rain somewhere in the distance. My car was exactly where I'd left it, quiet and waiting. I opened the door and sat inside, not turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but they weren't shaking. Not anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt space inside my chest instead of pressure. I drove without rushing, letting the city slip past the windows like a film playing in slow motion. Houses blurred into storefronts, then into the gentle rise of downtown buildings glowing in the dusk. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky had deepened into indigo. Inside, everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. The cap and gown were still on the chair by the window. I walked over and touched the fabric lightly. Yesterday, it had felt like proof of effort. This morning, it had felt like the question to a cruel joke. Now, it felt like a boundary I had finally drawn. Over the next few weeks, I moved through life differently, quieter, but not small. I packed my belongings into clean boxes, labeled them neatly, lined them against the wall. I signed paperwork for a job offer that arrived out of nowhere, steady and honest. I found a new apartment across the city, then across another city line, then finally somewhere that felt like starting over. On the morning I left, sunlight spilled across the floor like a soft curtain. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the calm. My phone buzzed once. A short message from my father, "I'm sorry for everything." Then another from my mother, "We should talk." I let the screen go dark. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the promise of something open, something unclaimed. I locked the door to the old apartment, slid the key into my pocket, and walked toward the future that for the first time felt like mine. Some distances don't grow overnight. They reveal themselves the moment you stop shrinking to fit inside them. I used to think silence was something done to me, a space forced around my edges. Now I understand it differently. Silence can also be a doorway, a clean threshold you choose to step through when the old rooms no longer feel like home. If you've ever rebuilt yourself quietly, piece by steady piece, I hope you know there's nothing weak about walking away. And if you're listening from anywhere in the world, tell me this. Have you ever drawn a line you never crossed back over?